Come on by and have a bite at the Crossroads Diner, where your spirit goes when it might be time to change direction. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Crossroads Diner. This is your buddy, Steve McCurdy, and with me today is one of the great joys of my life, one of the students that I had years and years and years ago, and also the star of the first iteration of the Crossroads Diner. Rob Denbleyker, welcome to the Crossroads Diner.
Thanks, Steve. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here. Rob was, as I say, Rob was in the show. He played the role of Will, and Will was stuck in the diner. Actually, I'd rather you tell the story. What is your remembrance of?
Oh man, it's been so long, and I never watched the recordings afterwards. So once I got off stage, that was my last experience with the Crossroads Diner. But yeah, I remember it being a story about a guy who was troubled in life, didn't know which direction to go in, and then he looked to his friends, to his spirituality, to find purpose and to find a direction to go. That's what I remember. And I also remember staring at the spotlight and having some vision problems afterwards.
Let's unpack that. So we had 3 shows that day. It was a sanctuary musical. We had about 2,500 people over those 3 services watch that 57-minute program. And at the end of which, Rob had a trauma occur that terrified me. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I remember the show was amazing. I was so nervous before the rehearsals. Like for me, the rehearsals are the most fun. You're just hanging out, low stakes, having fun with your friends. But then, just on Sunday when we did those 3 shows, I remember being really nervous, but I got a lot of support from the other people in the choir and from you, and I had an absolute blast. And then I remember afterwards, the next day, I was on my way to school, and I noticed that I had trouble seeing like the spotlights on the road. Like whenever I looked directly at the green light, the light would disappear and kind of swirl around like there was a hole in the center of my vision. And I waited for it to clear up. I figured it was just temporary, but then like a week later, it was still there. And my mom took me into the eye doctor. They did retinal scans, and they saw like a tiny little burns essentially in the center of my retinas. And it was because during my solo in those 3 shows, there was a spotlight on the balcony in the back. And I was looking directly at it. I was doing my solo and staring. I believe the song was like singing directly to God. So in my mind, I'm going to look at that light and focus on that the whole time, which also, it helped me pretend there was no audience to not see that, to look away from the crowd, which
the strategy was good. The execution could use work.
Absolutely. In retrospect, you shouldn't stare at bright lights. Like I think that's something everyone learns from a young age. But the scary part was, it didn't clear up for a couple of weeks, even a few months. But the eye doctor said at my age, I was 18 years old, and they said at your age, it's a 50-50 shot. It might be permanent or it might clear up, because young people's eyes, it can heal. Older people's eyes don't necessarily heal.
That's
so
right.
it was sort of wait and see, no pun intended. But
you were also sitting there at finals time. You went to a private school, and you were unable to read adequately to take your finals.
Reading was a struggle. I found ways around it by not looking directly at the words. My brain started adapting, so I was able to figure out how to read gradually. But that little swirl in the center of my vision just persisted, and that was the scariest part. Is like imagining that happening the rest of my life. Well,
particularly because you already had admission to a school in Dallas, and you wanted to be an animator, as I recall.
Yeah, staring at screens, lots of data. And that was another thing. Like if I was looking at a small number on the screen, like as soon as I looked at it, the number would disappear. So I had to use larger fonts during that period. It was definitely scary to think about a future of not being able to look at screens.
Well, in the middle of the crisis that your character had, the premise was that you were in the Crossroads Diner. It's a place your spirit goes when it's time to change trains, go a different direction. And the entire choir and a bunch of extras would come in. The trains would come in. They'd all figure out where they wanted to go, and they'd all disappear. You'd be left over. You and the waitresses, Faith, Hope, Grace, and Lucy.
Yes, yeah, I remember that.
And you would be left over because you just couldn't figure out which way to go. And you were afraid of the things that you'd done in the past that were failures. And so I gave you a solo pleading to God for direction. And the lyrics that I gave you were, please, God, love me like you did the killer of your children. Strike me blind and light me to your will.
Oh, wow.
So imagine, huh?
I forgot that lyric.
Yeah. And so here I find out a day or two later that you're practically, going blind, at least partially blind. And I was devastated for you. And we did think at that time that it very likely was going to be permanent, and your direction and career goals were your identity at that point in time was very tied to your vision. Mm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to get into the visual arts. I was already doing animation on my own. So yeah, it was definitely a scary moment to hear that you have a 50-50 chance of, like, it wasn't going to get worse. I was never at risk of going blind completely, but it was always going to be there, like, unless it healed up.
But there was a functional blindness, to my way of thinking, there was a functional blindness that prohibited you from excelling at what you wanted to do. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a handicap. And I remember distinctly trying to read a book and looking at the words on the page, and wherever my vision looked, the words would just disappear. So I had to start, like, looking away and using my peripheral. And it was just, everything was just slightly inconvenient, right, especially on a computer. And there would where I wanted to.
Right. And you were going to be living on a computer.
Exactly. I already did live on a computer through high school.
That's true. So talk us through what your emotional and you always have struck me as a very disciplined, logical, grounded young man, and not one prone to panic and emotional response. But surely there was a wreck.
Yeah, I did panic, especially in the first month, because it wasn't clearing up. And then as time went on, as the months went by, it did start to get better. I started to notice more details. And I started to the doctor said 50-50. So in my mind, at the beginning, I was like, well, let's see what happens in the next few weeks, the next month. I'm not going to panic because I am young. Like the doctor was optimistic. So I'm going to be optimistic too.
Yeah.
And the timing was obviously terrible because my final exams were coming up. I couldn't study. A lot of my classmates volunteered to help tutor me since I couldn't read very comfortably. So I had a lot of support at school as well. And the professors were flexible too. One professor, I think it was my history teacher, let me do an oral final instead of written. And he kind of, he threw me some softballs, which was nice, because ultimately you're not at high school to prove how well you understand U.S. history. You're there to show you can learn and get your degree and then move on to what really matters. Right. I think the teachers at my school were very flexible, and they understood that, and they really helped me. They helped me learn and finish strongly. But then, yeah, as the months went on, it started to clear up. And I just remembered feeling just incredibly relieved and grateful that on that 50-50 coin toss, I came up heads. And,
that's beautiful.
So it was a panic. I panicked, but it was short-lived. The healing process began, I think, about a month later. And then by about 4 to 5 months, it felt mostly back to normal.
But by that time, you were in school.
By that time, it was, towards the beginning of freshman year.
Right. And did you change your trajectory at all as a result of your scare?
I decided to stay with it because I was already finding ways to adapt, even in those. The human brain is kind of interesting. And I learned that as I was coming off of that eye injury. I immediately started adapting and started using my peripheral vision and adjusting, which I guess is just something the brain does. It adapts. And within a couple of weeks, the hole in my vision was still there, but I was able to kind of look around it and move it around. I began adapting, which was kind of fascinating to me. Well, so
did you do any creation during that period of time? I mean, you were already an animator and a cartoonist.
Yeah, I was still doing a bit. I was slowing down because it was harder for me to focus on the screen. And also the doctor said, don't look at screens, spend some time just away from bright lights. And yeah, I mostly just it was towards finals, so I didn't really have time to animate.
Okay.
But I remember just being mildly panicked, but mostly just accepting that whatever happens, happens, and I'm going to work with it.
Outstanding. Well, there's a lot of good lessons there. The interesting thing to me is that you maintained your identity and your determination about your trajectory, where you were going. You didn't abandon that or start looking for alternatives. You looked for ways to adapt your capability to where you wanted to go.
Yeah, I tried to adjust because I didn't want to. My dream was always to do animation, and I was never going to give that up. So I just decided to adapt, learn how to work around the disability. So then I was very fortunate that.
Yeah, because you've had a remarkable success. You've had a remarkable evolution with tell folks what you do and where they can see some of your stuff.
Yeah, well, when I was in high school, I started doing flash animation for fun. I taught myself how to animate, and I cultivated a very small following online, a couple of hundred people who would tune in to see what I was making next. And that inspired me to keep creating things on the internet, like just for fun as a hobby.
Yeah.
And in college, some friends of mine that I had met on the internet, we started a cartoon series called Cyanide and Happiness. And it was just for fun. It was just a hobby. And within a few years, it became a huge worldwide phenomenon. People all over the world started reading Cyanide and Happiness. We started doing animations. We did a daily comic, and just millions of people around the world started following it. And it became my career very, very gradually during college. But by the time I graduated, it was a full-time job.
Amazing. It's a fabulous story. And your sense of humor, or your group's sense of humor, is not unusual for your generation. It is incredibly dark to me.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
But I find myself blushing a little bit at the things that I laugh at. But so that turned into a thing for you, and it continues to be a thing for you. And how do people find Cyanide and Happiness? I mean, just Google that. Yeah,
usually it finds you. It's all over Facebook, all over Instagram.
Well, and I think when people see it, they're going to recognize it. Go, oh yeah, I've been looking at this for years.
Oh yeah, even if you don't know what it is, you've seen it on your Facebook feed. I guarantee it. It has a way of worming its way in to your social feed. But that's been my career for close to 18 years now, and it's wonderful. I mean, I work with amazing people. I no longer animate myself. We have a team of animators, and I very much have fallen into a writing and directing position, which you know how it is. It's getting to watch the process from start to finish from the inside. Yeah. It's so satisfying to see it all come together.
Yeah. Also, it's you get to stay at the creative forefront of things, but you also get that wonderful team sense of playing with an artist. Do they then bring things to it sometimes that kind of surprise you and amplify what you've been working on?
Yeah, all the time. And that's what I love about it. We're such a small team that every single person, every animator, voice actor, sound designer, they all bring something new from the script. Like, so what's the final animation is, it's not just one writer. It's like 7 or 8, because every single person is a writer. Everyone who improvises a facial expression or a nuance in the voice acting. It's such a team effort. And it's amazing to see, it's amazing to see a creativity come from unlikely places.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you started, the first show you did with me, as I recall, was The Long Way Home. And you were in the chorus, and we had this fantasy stick, because you started out as a farmer and you were raking with a hoe, and then the guy, and it was nothing. It was just hands, and you even asked me, well, when do I get the hoe? And I said, no, you're just going to do it with air, and you went, yeah, really? And you looked at me like, oh gosh, this whole man is crazy. And, but then during the song, the guy has this fantasy where, he's going down the Nile on a barge, and I had all of you turn that into oars. And you're going, but when do I get the stick? And so your mom called me the next day and said, what did you do to my son? I said, what are you talking about? I talked all the way home about air sticks and air hose and air, I said, okay, great. And then the next year, you were in one of the shows. And the year after that, we were doing auditions and for Crossroads Diner.
Well, the first one was Fiddler on the Roof. Remember?
Right. Yeah. But I'm saying that the very first year you were in the chorus, confused about phantom props.
Yeah, right.
The second year, you're Perchik in Fiddler on the Roof and did a lovely job with that. In fact, you and Laura did some great stuff creating some choreography.
That was so much fun.
Yeah, it was great. And then, but in the third year, you came in to audition. And, the way that we did auditions back then is everybody's in the room. And the next one comes up. They stand by Sid. He plays an arpeggio and you sing your song. And I say, what are you going to sing for us today? And they tell us. I ask you, what are you going to sing for us today? And you said, well, you'll see. And then you turned your back to me. And I looked across at 30 guys and gals sitting on the other side of the room. They're all looking like, what the heck is this? And then you started singing, I am Don Quixote, the man of La Mancha. And you and my daughter fell off of her chair. And other people, everybody was stunned because you had just emerged within a year and a half from an incredibly shy, retiring, quiet, introverted young man to this guy who was stepping into it. Do you remember that?
Absolutely. That was a life-changing moment for me. It was all credit to Sid Davis for motivating me to do voice lessons and then following through for I think close to a year. But yeah, before when I joined Pure Sound, I was incredibly shy. I think in my head, I had this attitude that a lot of kids have, which is fear. I'm afraid what people think of me. I think people are like, they think I'm weird. They're making fun of me behind my back. I think lots of kids have those anxieties.
Absolutely.
But Pure Sound brought that, like, kind of squashed that because it was such an incredible group. It was just such a non-judgmental environment where everyone just sang their heart. Singing is one of the most vulnerable things you can do. Yeah. It's one of the most unnatural and vulnerable positions to put yourself in, is singing a song while quiet faces look back at you, and voice lessons sort of taught me how to have that confidence to just stand in front of a group, whether it be the choir or a church full of people I don't know or an audience, and just learning how to perform without assumption, without assuming that people are questioning your pitch or your posture or the face you're making. It was just an amazing moment for me, singing that song and seeing that reaction and realizing that, like, I got this. I can just be me, and no one's judging me. And you celebrating.
You bring up Sid Davis and the program that Sid has been doing for years and years and years at St. Louis Methodist Church in Houston. Because people go, wait a minute, you're doing theater and you're doing church, is it all Christian stuff? No, we did every kind of show imaginable and a lot of original ones. Because Sid just had this incredible faith in all of you that if we expect great things from you, you're going to produce it. Mm-hmm. And you went from ultra shy to the lead in a year and a half. And that confidence and that lack of self-consciousness that allows you to deliver. Mm-hmm. And then you went on. It's what strikes me there is the kids of Pure Sound stepped up and were supportive, and you accepted that support. You believed it. You'd spent 2 years in shows watching them back each other up and be an ensemble and be, and then you carried that into your profession, that you expected that kind of relationship in teams. And or am I presuming too much?
No, that's absolutely right. If I hadn't been in Pure Sound, I don't think I would have followed the same trajectory I'm on now, because there's a lot of, it's like I said, not worrying what people think is a skill. Like, obviously that doesn't mean run around and be terrible and don't care what people think of you, but don't assume that anyone wants you to fail. Because that's one thing I've learned over the years, is that with very rare exceptions, everyone in the world wants everyone else to be happy. I think that's a solid baseline to assume of your peers. And that's true in a youth choir, in a musical cast, in the animation industry, like in Hollywood, maybe less so, but the people you surround yourself with matter, and nothing in the world gets done by one person. Everything worth doing is a team effort, and that's something that I learned in high school through Pure Sound, and it's something I especially learned afterwards, and by carrying those skills forward.
Right.
And yeah, I think a lot of people stay in their own heads their whole life. They never come out of that shyness and that assumption, that anxiety that the world's against them. And
right.
And I think, Pure Sound was a huge part of bringing me out of that mentality.
I think that's why people enjoy sports so much, being on football and baseball teams, things like that, volleyball, is that when you're part of a team, when you're part of something bigger than yourself, you get out of that self-focused mentality and that critical, self-critical awareness, and want everybody to win because everybody's going to have that score. Everybody's going to get that trophy, that medal.
Exactly.
Or that loss, and have to come around, turn it around and do better next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's interesting though, is in today's, I mean, you talk about Facebook, social media, I would get the impression that would be even harder to start believing, giving the tackiness that and the attacks that social media seems to provoke to me. Is that just my old man view looking at it, or are you just ignoring that and moving on? I don't quite perceive
social media. In the space that I work in, like I could talk for hours about social media and the downsides and upsides, but you're absolutely right. It makes people angrier and a little less connected, especially lately. I think these giant social media companies, obviously what they're looking for is clicks and engagement. And the best way to get engagement is to make people angry. And I think that's why we get served things that are controversial and upsetting. On Facebook.
So then how are you turning that around and for yourself and your buddies?
We mostly try to fight it by ignoring it. We try to make things that are positive and funny and promote, positivity and humor. We stay away from politics. We just make cartoons. And so far it's worked. Like people come to us to escape from the world.
That's great.
I think that keeps us going.
That's great. Great. So you got young people, the audience I hope to attract. I don't really know at this point in time where people are coming and finding Crossroads Diner, but the seed that I want to plant is the one that you just talked about. Most folks want you to succeed. They're spending time with you. They'd like that to be a good time. So that means you got to win too, but there's some mountains you got to climb. You got to get rid of that self-awareness. You have to acquire some form of self-confidence. Mm-hmm. And you have to kind of know who you are and where you want to go, and have the guts to follow the passion that is bubbling back there, rather than going with what is expected of you that might be safer.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said the word mountain, because I remember a friend of mine years ago, he described he was just talking about the entertainment industry, especially since the rise of the internet and how crazy and unpredictable it is. But I think it applies to a lot of things. But he said to him, the entertainment industry is kind of like climbing a mountain blindfolded, holding hands with your friends. And sometimes you're pulling them up. Sometimes they're pulling you up, and you're all blindfolded. You don't know where the peak is or how far it is, but you're all heading in the same direction. And that's something that I kind of took to heart, because I think that's the way the world works. Like we're all on the same team ultimately, right. And we're all pulling each other up or being pulled up.
Right. And the flip side of that anger producing thing produces a bunch of independent thought, and the metaphor I heard for that is life is a log floating down a river with 7 billion ants on it, all of whom think they're steering.
Absolutely.
And the only ant that's got any peace of mind at all is hanging on for dear life, trying to enjoy the ride, But if they're all holding hands, that's a group of them. That's good.
Yep. Except for the ones on the bottom.
So I think you've given us some great parting words, but any summary you would like to offer folks that are stuck or meeting a challenge that they don't even know how to face yet? What's the first place you would have them go to within their spirit?
I mean, the first thing I would say is take a break from whatever it is in front of you. Like, go for a walk, call a friend, especially if you're struggling in your career, because at least from my perspective, in the past, since the pandemic started, it's been there's been a lot of ups and downs, lots of struggles. And I think the best thing you can do is walk away and kind of zoom out, look at the big picture, focus on your friends, focus on the things in life that make you happy, and don't necessarily get caught up in what makes you the most productive or advances your career. Just to find ways to enjoy yourself, especially in this day and age where we're in a pandemic, but not quite in a pandemic. And like, we're still hanging out, but trying to be careful. And everyone's sort of, a lot of people are facing, career challenges these days. I feel like, I would say the best thing you can do is just reach out to people and never assume that people don't want you to reach out to them.
Oh, that is great. That's great stuff. Rob Denbleyker, Dallas, Texas, animator of Cyanide and Happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for being in the Crossroad Diner today. Next time up is Monday, and we're going to be talking about nuts and bolts of how you do the kinds of things Rob talked about, how you take an assessment, give yourself a break, and find a breather. Until that, I'm Steve McCurdy. This is the Crossroad Diner. Rob, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
Come back to the Crossroad Diner, that place where your spirit goes when it might be time to change direction. Next Monday, John Burnett and I take another look at how you determine what your purpose is and your mission.